Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So my name is Ben Chappell. I am the CEO of Epona Security, and I'm joined here today by Roger Neal, who's our head of product with Epona, and also Janet Worthington, who is a security and risk senior analyst from Forrester. Y'all, we're just thrilled to have both of you here today. We're also joined by our friends with Labrador. Labrador Labs are the leading SCA technology that's in our market space, and we're excited to dive into what we're working on. So before we get into best practices, I do want to take the opportunity to let you get to know your panelists, right? So Roger, Janet, a couple quick questions for you guys. So you have embedded your life with security and analyzing risk and understanding what's in front of you, projected outcomes, mitigation, the whole nine, right? So let's take a real life scenario, day to day that other people could even relate to. Let's say you go to a football game and there's lightning outside. Roger and Janet, are you going to be the first to run to the car, or are you going to be the last one sitting in the bleachers?
I'll go ahead and start this one off. That's a great question. Me personally, I guess it depends on how far the lightning strike was. So if that lightning strike was pretty close, I am the first to the car. I'm not made of rubber, so I'm not immune to electricity, and would not go well for me if I was struck.
I don't blame you. Janet?
Well, Roger had the perfect answer because he did say let's depends, and every security answer begins with let's depend. So I'd be following Roger.
Well played, well played. Okay, so how about another one that we could all be familiar with? How about swimming and getting cramps? Do you typically wait 30 minutes after meals? Do you think that whole idea is a myth? Or do you snack all day long just to avoid it?
The idea could potentially be a myth, but like in security, always want to prepare for the worst. So I'm going to be waiting 30 minutes prior to hopping in that pool.
I guess I'm a little more daring than Roger, and I would jump in the pool.
I'm gonna go for it too. Not gonna lie, I'm jumping in head first. All right, last one, real life scenario, day to day. Your phone rings. All right, it's from an unknown number. What's more scary than that? It looks sketchy, but it's a local number, and you might be getting a phone call from somebody within that day. Do you answer the unknown number, or do you let it go into voicemail?
I would say I answer. I'm a mom, and sometimes you only have to miss a call once from another parent whose number you didn't recognize, or your kid who picks up somebody else's phone to call you, to realize you never know. And if it's a telemarketer, then you just kind of politely try and get off as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Roger?
Yep, I'm on the exact same page as Janet there. So typically, I would go ahead and just answer it because I guess maybe fear of missing out, because you never know. That call could be something.
Every call.
Exactly. Could be great. I take every single call that comes my way.
All right. Well, hey, y'all, I'm excited to get into this topic with you guys. We have done a lot of research into this, and Janet, your team has equally done a lot of research, right? So for those wondering who Epona is an application security company. We focus on the SCA, SaaS, DaaS, application dependency mapping technologies. All right, our path in life is discovering security vulnerabilities at the source, right? So we're approaching the source code much different than your other defense technologies. With that, it created a very strong and sincere partnership with Labrador. Okay, so Labrador is a leading SCA on the market, and also with Janet. Janet miraculously has a very strong wealth of knowledge in this space. And so with that, Janet, I'd like to open up to you and share some of your discoveries.
Yeah, well, first, thank you, Ben and Roger and Hisha, for having me on today. I'm looking forward to it. So I think I'm going to just start by talking about where we are with the software supply chain. And that will help you understand where software composition analysis comes into play. So we have a lot of data. We actually ask, security professionals every year a number of different questions. And, if we could look at the slide on the breaches that are happening, what we'd see is that last year or 2 years before, when we asked security professionals how many times you've been breached, 63% said that they had been breached at least once. The following year, 74% have said that they have been breached at least once. And I would love for you to see the slides. I apologize, I can't forward the slides. Thank you. So, and as you can see, it's not, Ben, as you can see, it's not just once, right? You have 60% of people saying they've been breached up to as much as 5 times. And then we look at the 11%, between 6 to 25 times. It's a lot of people. And in this one case, you don't want to be the 1%ers, because yeah, things are not good for them. So why do I show you this? I show you this because every organization is being breached. So we really have to understand where the breaches are coming from. And so we actually looked at that. We actually said, hey, if you've been breached at least once, you know, how? And we gave them 4 categories. Was it an internal incident? Maybe it was an employee or a contractor with malicious intent. Or maybe it was just a hardworking employee who made a mistake. Number 2 was, could it be a lost or stolen asset? Maybe credentials were sold on the dark web and that's how they got in. The third one could be, you know, a business partner or a third-party supplier who maybe, you know, they got breached and then that's how they got into your system. And the last one, and actually the one that's cited the most year after year, is an external attack. And so we wanted to then drill in to say, okay, we know people are getting breached. We know they're coming in from an external attack, and how does that happen? And what we saw was that software supply chain breach was the #1, the most often reported vector of attack. Number 2 was software vulnerabilities. And why is this important? Well, this is important in a couple of reasons. One, you need to understand where they're coming from. And 2, software supply chain attack and software vulnerabilities aren't just mentioned once. They can be in a multiple stage attack that they can be used. And so when we talk about things like software supply chain and vulnerabilities, in particular, a lot of times we think about open source. And why do we think about that? Well, first of all, open source is in pretty much every application. One industry leader looked at what they could find out there, and 96% of all the code bases that they scanned had open source in it. Of the ones that they did scan, 76% of the code base contained open source. 3/4 of the app. I mean, that's huge, right? I mean, and we get why. I mean, it makes sense, right? When you're a developer and you got to get things out quickly, it makes sense not to reinvent the wheel and use open source. But this does leave you open to some of the known vulnerabilities that are out there.
Jenna, do you think this is a practice that's, you know, just come up over the last 2 or 3 years, right? Is open source more widely available now, or is it? Do you guys think this is more of a discovery option, right? Like that we were able to see and analyze these types of things, and maybe open source has always been used, but we're just now figuring it out.
That's a good question. I think over the past 5 or 6 years, I think the adoption of open source has definitely year over year gotten, you know, much more utilized and adopted. Obviously, this past year it's kind of, you know, sort of plateaued a bit. I think part of that is because people are moving to the cloud, and cloud enables you to move faster. So if you want to move faster, you're not going to want to write all of your own libraries. And so I think that's helped with open source adoption. There's some signals in the market that maybe, you know, it's going to slow down a little bit. But what we see when we look at open source is that, you know, there are 10 libraries from, you know, if you look at each package manager that are very important that everybody uses. So I don't see it going away, open source. I see people still continuing to utilize it. I think people are taking a slightly more cautious approach, though.
No, I'd agree.
And actually, that kind of leads into the next thing that we're talking about, which is software supply chain attacks. And so software supply chain attacks, you know, we know attackers have always utilized, you know, vulnerabilities that aren't patched, right? They're smart, they're clever. Why wouldn't they? You know, you haven't patched it, they're going to use it. Next generation supply chain attacks, which are growing 74% 742%, which is just a number that's so big I can't even say it, year over year. You know, what these are is this is the attacker inserting malicious code into your supply chain. And so they're being aggressive. They're not trying to be opportunistic and wait for the vulnerability to come out. And what this allows them to do is they attack a supplier, they get a supplier to download a malicious package. Then that supplier bundles it with their code, and guess what? Next, all of the suppliers downstream customers are affected, and they're ripe targets for attack. One of them, to kind of give an example of a next generation supply chain attack that we hear about, is dependency confusion. And this is where an adversary figures out the name of an internal proprietary package and then creates a malicious package with the same name, puts it out on the public repo. Am I thinking, okay, well, what's the point of that? Well, when the automated build runs, it's going to trigger, and it's going to look for the latest version, which is on the public repo. And without knowing it, the build system has taken in a malicious package and bundled it with your application. And so this is just one way. We're seeing other ways. And Roger, I know you think a lot about next generation supply chain attacks. What have you seen?
Yeah. So kind of similar to how the data was showing, we have seen that those next gen supply chain attacks are on the rise, and kind of similar to what you were saying, because one, attackers don't want to wait for that vulnerability to come out. They want to take a more, I guess, proactive approach. And also hackers are lazy, and executing supply chain attacks have been typically found to be easy and pretty cheap. And we actually discovered this through a case study we did on a repo jacking attack we were able to perform on a popular NPM package. And in this case study, we were able to utilize our tool set to analyze multiple third-party maintainers. And through this analysis, we found that one of those maintainers had a expired domain. And through the discovery of this expired domain, we were then able to purchase that domain for only $9. So by purchasing that domain, we were then able to gain access to those GitHub credentials and gain access into that GitHub account, which allowed us to upload our own malicious code. If we were the bad actors, we were the good guys. So we actually returned that repository to the rightful owner. But as you can see, for just $9, an actual attacker could have actually made millions by exploiting these kind of weaknesses. And surprisingly enough, there are thousands of repositories that are still vulnerable to this potential attack today, which kind of emphasizes on why you need to maintain any third-party maintainers that are being used inside your environment.
Incredible.
Wait, so you're saying $9? That's like one cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Exactly. $9 and you can make millions.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what's interesting is that the government and lawmakers are realizing this, right? They're really realizing how vulnerable the software supply chain is. And what they're trying to do is they're trying not to stop organizations from using open source and third-party libraries. They're just asking for better visibility. And in fact, you can see over the years here with this timeline, the different laws that have been proposed. At one as early as 2014 was actually debated, where it would require SBOMs for software purchased by the federal government. That got stalled. We saw the National Defense Authorization Act. It came really close to requiring SBOMs, but for the Department of Homeland Security, but the last minute, in order to get the bill passed, they took it out. We did have a Hail Mary at the end of 22 with the omnibus spending bill. This was to keep the government going. And in it, it included a provision that the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, will require medical devices to submit software bills of material in order for them to be looked at by the FDA. And this is great because this is the first time we're seeing any sort of government regulation on SBOM getting through both chambers of Congress, which isn't easy these days. And it's not just legislation, right? I think if we look at, you know, like I said, it's hard to pass legislation. So if we look at some of the guidance for SBOMs on the next slide, what we see is that the White House isn't waiting for Congress to get their act together. And what they're doing is the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, they're the ones that hold the purse strings. They're actually using that as a way to get federal agencies. They issued a memo September of last year saying, hey, look, we need to step up the security of our software supply chain. And that means you, federal agency, need to turn to your suppliers and ask for a self-attestation on how they're doing their security of their development practices. And as part of that, agencies may also ask, do you have a software bill of materials? And we're starting to see a year later that we're actually getting traction on this. We're actually seeing, agencies start putting together the idea that they're going to, one, get the self-attestation, and two, the software bill of materials from suppliers. And the Biden administration did not stop there. They released their national cybersecurity strategy in March of this year, and they had a follow-up subsequent plan regarding it. And really, this sets the vision to secure our digital ecosystem by shifting consequences, and this is what I love, of insecure products away from consumers, away from folks like us, and requiring higher standards from suppliers. And this strategy hopes to sort of shape the market overall and promote security throughout the software and technology ecosystem, in part by incentivizing the private sector to prioritize cybersecurity and utilize secure by design principles. And one of those secure by design principles includes the generation of SBOMs. And then finally, we're seeing open source, right? That's not going to slip through the government. There's an Open Source Software Act that was proposed. It's not yet passed, but when that does get proposed, if that does get through CISA, we'll now need to start looking at open source software components that the government uses directly and indirectly, and part of that may include utilizing a software bill of materials. So what is a software bill of materials? I know I've kind of said it a couple of times, SBOMs. I know a lot of you might already be familiar with it. Basically, it's a list of all the software elements that make up a piece of software, including all the open source code. It shows you what your software is made of. People liken it to the ingredients on a pack of M&Ms or your favorite chocolate bar. And really, it had been in use in some of the medical devices, but it really didn't become well known until May of 2021, when the executive order was passed. As part of that, it tasked the National Telecom and Information Administration, or NTIA, defining what is a minimum elements for an SBOM. And what you see here is, what the minimum elements are, the date, which includes data fields. So information about each component, its metadata, so you can track it throughout the life cycle, the dependency relationships that come in. The second thing is it needs to support automation standards, because it would be really hard for humans to spend all day combing through these if there wasn't a way for machines to look at them. And so the NTI put forward 3 standards: SPDX, Cyclone DX, and SWIT tags. And then the last part is about the practices in the process. How frequently are you going to generate the software bill of materials? What's the depth? So when we talk about depth, we talk about direct dependencies. That is something that I, as a developer, I pull down. I'm like, I need to use this logging library. I find one, that's my direct dependency. What I may not see is the iceberg underneath, which is all of the transitive dependencies that pulling in that library has. And, we always recommend trying to, as much as possible, go all the way down in all the transitive dependencies when you create a software bill of materials.
I've got a really good question that came through the chat, if I could share. So Aitor has asked, what do you think about securing Open Source Software Act passing in Congress, and could it limit or cause a movement in free software and damage innovation in all areas, since all companies are going to be IT companies, or they can be considered Jurassic? I actually get the concern, right? I think the bigger question behind that is what has happened for the government to get involved in the first place. Okay, so typically when I look at U.S. government acts and the regulations that they have put in place, number one, there has to be money involved. So two, what is the financial deficit that's been on the other recourse of that act? So the trillions of dollars that have been lost or untracked, which probably matters more to the government, versus the holistically good of people. Okay, so the good nature behind it, right? And so I do vouch for the government. Let's say one simple example: we're going to require source code analytics and vulnerability scans for pacemakers or diabetic devices, because they fall under medical. So yeah, I would like for my family members with diabetic appliances they rely on to not have a malicious source code uploaded into their software update. Those types of things. But plus, I think it gives a good balance of, it's a good checks and balance. For the past 10, 15 years, organizations such as the Amazons and the Microsofts of the world have flooded the space with as much development as we possibly could, which has been wonderful for innovation, but it's also been haphazard with the outcome. So we've had a lot of down pitfalls out of that. It's a great question, and I do think it'll stifle some things, but so I believe in some of that stifling of innovation, we'll have more pure practices, and hopefully on the other end, we have a more organic approach in the result. I hope that's not too much.
I think that's a great answer. And I think to your point, when it comes to open source, it's, I think there was this idea that, well, the more popular a library is, the less issues it's going to have in it because there's going to be more eyes on it. Well, that turns out not to be the case, right? And I think part of that is because it's all about the ecosystem of that open source project. How often are people updating? Some of these libraries are great, right? Some of them are well maintained by, companies and open source communities that spend a lot of time. Others, to your point, are not, right? And so if you're the government and you're including this stuff, you want to have that visibility. So yeah, I totally agree with you. There may be some stifling a little bit of innovation, but I think it's almost like one of those things you take a step back to go 2 steps forward in the long run.
And to Roger's point earlier, the typical attacker is not very creative. They have a very consistent copycat nature to them, which is why you see just the very heavy spikes. Okay, so 2021, if we were to go back, you don't have to, if we went back 2 or 3 slides, you had the increased risk for software supply chain attacks. Started at 743%, but guess what? That started at 2021. Guess what 2021 was? Log4j, right? So Log4j hits, the rest of the world just has a copycat, takes some quick hits, and that's where we're at. So yeah, the government then needed to step in. I hope it doesn't stifle innovation, right? For the betterment, to your point, Janet, that I think we're in a good place. I think it's a great question, Hector. Thank you.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into software composition analysis. So, I think trying to understand whether you're using open, whether you're a developer pulling in open source into your application or you're a maintainer of open source projects, like how do you get a good read on what's going on? Well, software composition analysis can do that for you. And one of the things software composition analysis does is it identifies all the open source and third-party libraries. It's basically an inventory of what's going on. And before you can take any action, you have to know what you have. And so these tools will do that. What they'll also do is they'll connect with the known vulnerability database and other types of advisories out there on known issues, and they'll give you an understanding of like, hey, this version of this component you're using, it has these issues in it, you may want to patch. In fact, a lot of them will actually tell you when your component is out of date. Hey, it's been, you're on a version 2 years old. Do you want to be on that? And you might think, well, why, whatever, it's 2 years old. But what happens is when there is a known vulnerability like Log4j that comes out, it doesn't get patched in every single version. It gets patched usually in the latest versions. And that means, you're 2 years back. That's a lot of patching you have to do and a lot of work that your development team does. So, keeping up to date on open source libraries is important. They also help you identify license risk. Companies have to worry about copyleft licenses, and those SCA tools will help you set, as an organization, decide what is the policy. Do you want to allow GPL licenses or not? That's important. And they also, and kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, is these software composition analysis tools will let you generate a software bill of materials that when the government comes knocking, or when one of your customers who might be a supplier to the government or supplier to the supplier of a government comes along and says, hey, I have to put together software bill of materials. I need to know what I'm pulling in from you. You can pass off that software bill of materials. And then the last couple cool things that software composition analysis tools are doing that I just want to highlight is they're talking more about the health of a package. And this comes, again, to talking a little bit more about the project, the maintainers, how much activity there's been, kind of try to give you the provenance of these open source libraries to give you not just an understanding of what, the security vulnerabilities are, but really who's maintaining it and how many people. And then the last one is malicious packages. And this goes to our next generation supply chain attacks. You need to know if you are downloading a malicious package. Typo squatting, we didn't discuss that one, but that's pretty easy. Like, I make mistakes all the time. If I was a developer, I might misspell a library, and now all of a sudden it's a malicious one that's part of my application. I didn't mean to, but it happens. And so, these software composition analysis tools can help with that. So there's so much that software composition analysis tools can do. Now, what's interesting is when my colleague, she did a wave, this is where we compare vendors for web application firewall. She asked them how their customers, what percent of your applications are being scanned. And they said, in terms of their customer facing ones, 37% of all their were covered. 37%, that's not a ton, right? But look at software composition analysis. We are leading the way. If you look at it, when I asked the same question of the software composition analysis customers, I said, hey, how much of your customer-facing applications are scanned? 77% said all of them. And 87% said they plan to have them all scanned by software composition the next year. That is a huge adoption rate. You don't typically see this when it comes to tools, but the reason is people understand the importance of understanding the open source and third-party libraries, security, risk, and the operational health of the packages. And so one of the last things that I want to talk about before I pass it off is it's easy to say, you need a software bill of materials, or you need to start, the government's coming along with all these mandates, hurry up, get to it. But what are some of the challenges that we see? So I think if you're a producer of software, you're the one that's developing the application. I think there are some more towards the top that you have to worry about. And then the consumers are the people who are, either pulling in this open source library as part of their application, or maybe they're buying a piece of software from somewhere else. But at some point, we're all in this chain, right? At some point, we're all software producers and we're all software consumers. And so these kind of apply to all of us. And if you think about these today, when we think about complex applications, we're talking about, different microservices. We're talking about, different SaaS services that you might include, that you might call. There's no longer one simple application. These, we used to talk about as monolithic applications. These applications are composed, and they're composed of open source third-party libraries and many other things. So, getting an SBOM for that can be challenging. Sharing software bills of material. How are you going to do that in a secure way? If you're a supplier, you want to make sure that there's a way you can pass that off to your customers, keeping that SBOM up to date. How frequently are you going to do it? Hopefully you're doing it with every build that you're doing, but that may not mean you necessarily give it to your customer with every build. So that's a discussion you need to have. And then the quality and depth of software bills of material. You could stop at the top level dependencies, but I don't think that goes far enough. You really need to go all the way down that dependency tree. When you're consuming the software bills of materials, I think this is sort of newer, if that makes sense. There isn't as much industry practices around it or tools to really ingest software bills of materials for procurement folks are coming. And just in general, I think we kind of started on the producer side, which makes sense. You need to have an SBOM before you can consume it. But there's all the questions about how do you store them? How do you take action on them? How often do you want to ask for them? So I think there's still a lot, even though that the government has been pushing software bills of material and sort of pushing software supply chain security. I think there's, different places we are. My only recommendation is you need to start, if you're a software developer organization, you need to start generating the software bills of material. It's super easy. You can use software composition analysis tools. There are other tools you can use as well, but I would suggest using software composition analysis because it'll give you a better understanding of what's going on these things that you're pulling in. And if you can automate it and integrate it into your development lifecycle, into your DevSecOps lifecycle, you'll be better for when somebody does come and ask you for it. And it also gives you insight. If there is another log4j, you don't have to go ask every development team, are you affected? Are you affected? Are you affected? You have one place where you do your search. So, Roger, I know I went over a lot of different things quickly there. Do you have, a way that you think about software composition analysis and the importance of it?
Yeah, actually, I do. And what I want to do is kind of go ahead and find a way to kind of showcase the importance of it. So now this is kind of the fun part for me. So we've already talked about the importance of prioritizing supply chain security and implementing robust processes to prevent catastrophic events. Now I'm going to go ahead and shift focus here, and I want to dive into the underlying reason for the prevalence of those supply chain attacks, which we kind of talked about previously, which is ease of exploitation. So to kind of drive this point home, I'm going to go ahead and showcase a live exploit here. And this exploit is going to be targeting the infamous Log4j vulnerability that Janet had just mentioned here. And I'm also going to illustrate the fix because it's one thing to showcase how it can be exploited. You need to know how you can fix this vulnerability and how you can prevent it from happening in your organization today. So to showcase this, I'm going to do it in a few separate aspects. The first aspect is going to be from the view of an attacker, where I'm going to go ahead and showcase the speed at which an attacker can identify and exploit vulnerabilities and customer-facing applications. The second aspect is I'm going to showcase how software composition analysis will enable developers and security experts to quickly address compromised components. And then the last aspect is going to be showcasing the role of software bill of materials from the consumer side and how it gives you as a consumer the ability to hold your vendors accountable and understand the different risks that are happening inside your environment. So what I'm going to do here is share screen, and now we're going to go ahead and start exploiting.
You make it sound so fun.
It is. Let's see here. You guys able to see my screen?
I'm still seeing Lily slide. There he is.
Beautiful. Okay. So to get going here, I'm going to start from the perspective of an attacker. Now, as an attacker, the first thing that I'm going to need is a list of potential targets. So to obtain this list, I'm going to be using Shodan, which is a search engine for all internet-connected devices. And to run this scan here, I'm going to use this specific command. So Shodan can be used for a wide variety of tasks. It can even be used to search for vulnerable systems, systems connected to the internet that are vulnerable to specific CVEs, which can be a very powerful tool for security researchers. But if it's left in the hands of the wrong people, it can be used for improper use. So this command that we're seeing here, or for this demonstration, I'm going to keep the scan at a very high level, and I'm going to search for any interconnected devices with the existence of log4j inside the HTTP title. So as I hit enter here, and it's going to go ahead and pull up my list. So right now, we are only looking specifically for the existence of log4j. But tools like Shodan can be used to find other weaknesses, such as like a recent zero-day vulnerability that was found in WebP. Now, it's not going to specifically tell that threat actor that a device is vulnerable to, like, say, log4j or WebP, but it's going to give me as an attacker clues to if that weakness exists, which is all I would need to pique my interest to then try to infiltrate your specific organization. So as we see, it's going to come up with this list of devices that meet my search requirements. And now that I've compiled my list of targets, the next step is to go ahead and prepare my exploit. So since we're going to be exploiting the log4j vulnerability, which was caused by a weakness with inside the GD lookup, which allowed attackers to call and execute their own malicious code, there's only a few steps to set up our attack environment. So setting up an exploit is surprisingly straightforward. It just involves researching the vulnerability and mimicking the described exploit, or finding a proof of concept that demonstrates how an exploit is run. In this demonstration, I've chosen a POC that creates a LDAP server, and that LDAP server is going to point at a directory containing my malicious Java payload. Specifically, it's going to be a reverse shell. So when any reference is made to this server, it's going to release malicious payloads and infect that system. So when I go ahead and input my code here to start up my proof of concept here, as you can see, my LDAP server is now live. So now all I have to do as my final step from the attacker is start up a netcat that's going to catch any of those successful reverse shells. So now I have a netcat listening. Now, if I go ahead and split screen here, make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Okay. So just to make sure I'm showing the right things here, are you guys able to see my application on the right side of the screen here? All right, perfect. So for this scenario, I'm taking it from the standpoint, let's say I'm going through my list of targets, and while I was going through my list of targets, I found this specific IP import. And when I navigated to this IP import, it took me to the specific login page. Now, as an attacker, this is canny to me because I now know that I'm able to start attempting to run my exploit. So running this exploit is as simple as inputting this command, which is going to take advantage of that weakness found within the Jindy string. And what this is doing is telling it to perform a Jindy lookup onto my LDAP server. So I'm going to input the IP of where my LDAP server is running. And just by inputting this simple command here, when I go ahead and hit login, we can see over here on the left side that I'm now connected. So in a matter of minutes, I was able to detect, find a specific target, set up a specific exploit, and then execute that attack. And just like that, I'm now inside your internal network. So once I'm inside your computer, it's pretty easy for me to say, list the different directories. Now I can navigate through the different directories with inside your web application server. I can even maybe, if I wanted to install specific packages, let's say it's pretty common, maybe if I wanted to install a crypto miner, and through the use of this crypto miner, I want to use your guys' resources to start making passive income. Or if there isn't proper segmentation with inside the environment, I can even navigate to different operating systems that are located within this specific network. So in a matter of minutes, I could cause millions of dollars worth of damage, like we saw back in 2021 with that infamous log4j vulnerability. Very cool stuff here. So I'm sorry, Ben.
It doesn't matter how many times I see it, it still catches me every
Exactly.
time.
Mm-hmm.
The simplicity of it and the ability to execute so quickly.
Exactly, which is kind of the main point that I think is really left off when thinking about cybersecurity, is how easy attackers can exploit a vulnerability and the amount of damage they can do once they're in their network. Because once you're in your network, it's very easy to maneuver around and get the sensitive information and hinder everyday processes. But now we've kind of taken a look from the attacker's point of view and how we were able to easily go ahead and infiltrate the specific network. Now I want to go ahead and take a look from the other side of it, which is going to be the defensive aspect and how you can prevent this from happening to your organization. So I'm going to show this from two separate perspectives. The first perspective is going to be from the developer standpoint. So from a developer of a compromised application in charge of maintaining the application source code. And then the second perspective is going to be from the eyes of a consumer. So how you as a consumer can utilize SBOMs to identify vulnerable components inside your environment. So for that here, I'm going to go ahead and switch screens. Oh, looks like I got logged out here. Beautiful. Make sure I'm showing the right stuff here. Okay, perfect. So As a developer here, it could be difficult to identify multiple components, as Janet was saying. It can be hard to go through all those different applications, especially if my team and I are in charge of maintaining multiple different apps inside which we see inside current environments today. And that's why software composition analysis is so crucial. So right now we're taking a look at our software composition analysis tool, Labrador, which allows us to identify any open source component used in an application, whether it be nested, modified, or forked. And through the use of tools like Labrador, my team was able to analyze all our applications. And by doing so, we're going to get nonstop insight into any new attack vectors that were created by third parties. So as you can see here, I already analyzed the application that we saw just get exploited. And thanks to software composition analysis, I'm now able to view all the different components that are used in this application. And when I go to my vulnerability analysis section here, I'm now able to see that the existence of this vulnerable log4j was found within inside this application. Now, not only is software composition analysis going to tell you that this vulnerable component was existent within inside that application, it's also going to give you the fix for it. So if we go over here to the right, it's going to let me know by upgrading to this package is going to remediate the existence of that vulnerability found within inside that application. So just as quickly as a developer, not a developer, sorry, but just as quickly as an attacker was able to infiltrate my network, I would be just as quickly able to scan my application and remediate this vulnerability that was found. Or with this information, my security team can now take the necessary steps to say maybe isolate the specific compromised system to prevent it from affecting that organization. So now that's from the side of the developers who have access to the source code. Now let's take a look from the other aspect of the consumer that's taking in that application. And for this, I want to focus on the importance of software bill of materials, because this is really where software bill of materials become so crucial. So like we were saying previously, SCAs also give you the ability to generate those SBOMs. So if I were to require software bill of materials from my vendors here, if I go ahead and showcase an SBOM, it's now going to give my team the ability to search through this SBOM and do some research. Now, after that vulnerability was reported, the MVD is going to let you know what components were vulnerable to that exploit. Now, as I'm able to search through the software bill of materials here, my team is now able to see that in this component that we took in our environment, there is the existence of this vulnerable of this component that's susceptible to that log4j. So not having to have the actual application source code, but just having the software bill of materials, I'm now able to understand that, okay, we have a vulnerable system. And now from here, you have the ability to take this to your vendors to say, hey, look, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but there's a vulnerable component and this needs to be fixed. And through the use of SCA, you can also send the fix to them as well. So you're not really just being a nuisance to say, hey, fix this. You're going to go ahead and give them, you're trying to help them and increase their security posture. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to get to is increased collaboration and increased transparency when it comes to the security realm. So by enforcing SBOMs like we saw previously, as a consumer, I'm now able to identify that vulnerable component. And then again, I can isolate that environment. So to kind of tie everything back together, we saw how an attacker would be able to quickly infiltrate a vulnerable application, and how proper supply chain management processes give you the ability to negate their ability to exfiltrate your network or infiltrate your organization and prevent those catastrophic events from happening. That's all I got for you guys.
No, that was awesome, man. That was awesome. That really good look at that. You know, it was once told to me that there's a big difference between running a software bill of materials and allowing it to be a living and breathing document to become a supply chain risk and security practice. And I think you're showing that very well through what the capabilities of Labrador offer. So 3 cheers on that.
Oh yeah.
All right.
No.
Oh, Lily, we got wrong.
Wrong screen, Lily. Okay. So with that being said, I guess what should we head into some Q&A?
Guys, we're gonna open up the Q&A lines here. We also have Hijo, who has joined us, the founder of Labrador. I'd like to offer as much time as you would like, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. The talk is so impressive. So Janet introduced how SCA tool can be helpful for managing SBOM and also enhance software security. And the largest demo, it is very impressive. It's attacker's point of view and the defender's point of view, how we can manage the vulnerabilities. Even one vulnerability can give a big damage for us. Now I'd like to share my experience regarding SBOM management, particularly from the customer experience. First one is the without SBOM management part. Second one is with SBOM management. The first without SBOM management, there was two cases. First one is the certification failure. The second one is the security instance. During the security certification, there are some possibilities of component found later, and these components already passed the EOL, end of life, or sometimes EOS. So, in that case, the security certification cannot be approved, but it is not easy to replace the vulnerable component because of the backward compatibilities. Usually, backward compatibilities is not easy to replace one version of a component in another version. So at that case, we need to take longer time to get approval, even after the developing the software without that vulnerable component. And the second case is security instance. There are many security instances which exploit the vulnerability of services, but in that vulnerability is coming from the component which were not managed, were not recognized by the administrator. So this kind of the old version of components may cause the target of attackers. And now I'd like to talk about the case of SBOM management. In case of for instance, Labrador customers, they can do monitoring. For instance, in case of some groups, the global IT companies, and then there's the insurance companies. They monitor hundreds of repositories every day, and they recognize which components include in their services, and even if there are new vulnerability announced recently, they can figure out from the automated alerts whether their service are affected or not. So in that case, they can apply the backporting patch even if the version of it is not applicable due to the backward compatibility problem. So I'd like to say that transparency. It is not only giving the clear idea what is inside, but it allows us to manage our service properly, and it gives us the enhance the security of our services, so we can manage that situation properly. So these are some of the experience, and then I think we can get many lots of benefits from this transparency from the SBOM management. Thank you.
Yeah, well said. I agree. You've also said some really strong statements in there that have created 4 more questions out of the audience today. So Jeff is asking, what languages and platforms do you support, and how does a user kick off scans? Who would like to take that one?
I guess I can go ahead and give some insight into that. So we actually support, and Hijo, you can hop in here too if you want, but we actually support over 150 languages.
Right.
So we support a very wide variety of languages. We're covering all the common ones, such as like Python, Java, C++, C#. And then what was the second part of that questions? Oh yeah, and then as far as kicking off a scan, Ben, do you want to handle that?
Get in touch with us. As simple as that. So we can drop we'll drop my email in the chat and get in touch with our team, or engage directly with Labrador. And we would set up a session and analyze exactly what you would like to achieve. We'd walk through your expectations, and then we could set off a scan with you guys.
Very quick process. Only takes a couple minutes.
It is. Heitor is asking, what's this perspective of Labrador Labs and Epona with Forrester? Make extensive reports like those presented in the webinar to be shared and ready by clients and representatives. I think he's asking, are we planning to start building some of these reports in tandem? Yes. And make these readily available for you to use? Yes. That is absolutely part of the goal, and we would love to arm you guys just to have a better and stronger conversation with the clients that you serve, if you're not a client yourself. So we do have a mixed audience. Some of our audience today is supporting other enterprises or mid-sized organizations or smaller businesses, and so it's an opportunity to open a new conversation around the services you offer. And we also have some organizations, for instance, Noel is asking, what is the full suite of products and services you're suggesting for small and mid-sized organizations? Roger? I don't want to sell, right? Like, this is an education. I have a tendency to just tell you it's amazing and I love you and we should do this together.
Okay. Yeah, but kind of touch on that one. So we offer quite a wide suite of products. So we offer the ability, like Janet was speaking on, blocking malicious packages. So we have a suite of tools for blocking malicious packages, preventing typo squatting and repo jacking attacks. We have a suite of tools like we saw with Labrador for creating software bill of materials, and then creating and understanding any vulnerabilities associated with known as OSS components within your application. Then we do also stretch further into aspects just like data security for mid-sized organizations. So really mainly focused on the secure code review, securing data. So pretty much if you want to secure your data, if you want to secure your applications, we have a suite of products that can help you with it.
When I look at that too, I look at it in the 3 Bs is what I look at, is how I view this. And it's everything you build, everything you borrow, and everything you buy. So everything you build is all the source code, all the coding and development that you do in-house. Everything you borrow is everything you bring from OSS. And everything you buy is everything you bring into your organization externally. So I don't look at this as an enterprise versus mid-sized versus smaller organization, right? I think we're all consuming development and source code in our own cups, and that's when it's worth a conversation, right? We love to partner with smaller guys as well as enterprise clients to try and bring a solution to market with you. Last question today from Philip. We have AI is already playing a big part in defending. I was wondering, honestly, thank you, Philip. I was wondering if we were going to not talk about AI, but I'm super glad that we are. AI is already playing a big part in defending application layer attacks. But how big of a role do you believe AI will play going forward, perhaps 5 years in the SCA market? Who would like to take that one?
I can start. So I am also glad that we're bringing up AI. So when I looked at software composition analysis tools and static application security testing tools, which, Ben, you pointed out when you're looking at issues in your own code, what I'm seeing is vendors are using AI. They've always used machine learning and AI to try and get better, but with generative AI coming out, there's a lot more capabilities that they can do. From adding new languages is being able to expand their portfolio they're using generative AI for. We're seeing some use it to explain vulnerabilities. So kind of like a chatbot experience in your IDE, a vulnerability is found, like, what does this mean for me? Providing code examples, as part of that explanation. And some are even, which is really cool, they're helping to automate the process, and automating the process for something like software composition analysis, putting out the latest helping you, to create a pull request and pulling out the latest version that you should go to, and in first-party code, actually writing, the fix for you. So there's a lot, I think, going on there. I'd also be remiss if I didn't just mention that when you're using generative AI tools and you're asking questions, sometimes they may give you an answer like, hey, go use this, logging library. You need to make sure that even when a computer tells you to do something, you're still double checking with your software composition analysis that that library actually truly exists. And then two, like we talked about before, that you understand the security, license, and operational risk of that library. So I think Gen AI is going to change how we develop code. It's already changing, but I think there's a lot it can do to help us protect and secure software. So yeah, thanks for letting me go first.
Yeah.
Also, I'd like to say my opinion. There are two problems in order to apply the immediate result of AI. The first one is the accuracy, and second one is the responsibility. So AI, until today, they generate even code and they suggest an opinion, but it is not always 100% true. So it may, even they produce wrong result, and then this causes the responsibility problem. We cannot wholly rely on that results, even though after fixing one problem, there could be some other problem occur in the next execution. So I think currently, even the generative AI, they produce the codes, the software itself. They inside of software has the vulnerability. So we should enter the prompt to fix the problem, and then we can manage one by one. But whole the procedure and the responsibility should be move on to the user rather than AI itself. So I think this accuracy and responsibility can be the problem to when we want to replace all the process of the SCI.
Yeah. And then I 100% agree as well. I do see Janet had mentioned a point on it helping with automation. And I do see AI playing a very big role in automation moving forward, especially in the security market. So you have tools like today where it can work in conjunction with, say, maybe a static application security tester that's going to provide just a simple code example and the location of a vulnerability. And I see the use of AI being able to take that vulnerability within the static application security tester and providing, say, an exact fix for your code. So negating the need of maybe you see a vulnerability, you don't know how to fix it, so you leave it with inside your application. Being able to utilize AI to provide an exact fix that won't break your code, and automating the process of remediating and performing those secure code reviews is something, or the route I see AI moving forward in the next couple of years.
I'd like to just agree with everything you all said. If I can. And I think the reality is, as we see, what was it, last week or 2 weeks ago, AI just caught up in the current day. And so to your point, Hijo, the validation side of this is paramount. If anything,
right.
Artificial intelligence has increased the demand for software composition analysis tenfold. And I think it will continue to do so over the next 5 years. I was looking at a video earlier of robots walking into a stadium. I don't think that the source code that we develop is going to manipulate the way those robots behave, but I do believe we have not seen the true risk associated with some of these attacks. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. This has been a fantastic conversation. Roger, Janet, Hijo, thank you so much for joining me. Look, the excellence in the research that you've done on the back end before this, Janet, in preparation is phenomenal. We cannot thank you enough for sharing your insight. And we will give you your day back. And thank you so much for joining us. If you need to contact us, if you would like to engage with us, please look at apona.ai for our website. We have a contact us form. My email is in the box. Anything else I'm leaving out, you guys feel free to chime in.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
It was great.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Dude.